Okay. Yes, we can start now. Welcome to this seminar to hear and share stories of human rights best practices in COVID-19 responses. This is stemming from the UN Office of High Commissioners for Human Rights and University of Tokyo's partnership in a crowdsourcing database project. And we were one of the partners in Asia. And this seminar particularly is jointly organized by the UN-OHCHR, International Law Hub of the University of Tokyo, and our university's graduate program on human security, Research Center for Sustainable Peace, and Institute for Advanced Studies. My name is Akihara Hunt. I'm associate professor at the graduate program on human security at the University of Tokyo, and I also direct the International Law Hub. So if you have any questions throughout the seminar, if you can put it in the chat, we have somebody who is picking up questions from the chat so that in the Q&A time, we can address those questions to any of the people who are speaking in this seminar. So please use chat. Okay, now I'd like to invite Mr. Todd Howland, Chief of Development and Economic and Social Issues Branch at the United Nations Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. He has over 25 years of experience in human rights work, including OHCHR representative in Colombia, the DRC, and Angola. And he's also contributed numerous scholarly articles to academic journals, including in Human Rights Quarterly. So without taking too much time, if I could invite Mr. Todd Howland, please.
Well, thank you very much, Professor. And first of all, I want to thank everyone who participated in this project. It's been a important and learning experience for us, and a humbling one. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has a role of contributing actively to the promotion of all human rights. And in the context of COVID-19, we actually had to look at our capacity, and we were like, there's no way that we're actually going to be able to make the contribution that we would like to make without reaching out to partners. And so in fact, this partnership with this group of universities led by the University of Tokyo and Professor Akihara Hunt is perhaps one of our first partnerships of this magnitude, where we took the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and within that framework, it discussed the need for the UN to look for partners to see how we can all contribute to achieving those goals and to achieving the economic, social, and cultural rights and some political rights that really underpin the Sustainable Development Goals. So for us, this project is an extremely important one in terms of precedent setting, because it showed that one, in situations like the pandemic, our office simply wasn't in a position to look for, to find good practices, to be able to integrate these into the reports that we were producing for the Human Rights Council, for our inputs within the Secretary General's reports and speeches related to COVID, for the statements being made by the High Commissioner. So I am greatly indebted to all of you for your participation, the professors, the students, because without you, we wouldn't have been able to collect the interesting number of good practices that were found. But more importantly, to begin to rise to the occasion, and how we can use this model, how we can learn from it. And that's why I think today will be so important for me to get a sense of, what went right, where were our challenges, and how can we learn from this so that we can replicate and improve upon this type of partnership. Because I think the Academy provides a unique possibility for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to do the type of, let's say, grounded or social science grounded research that's important for us to really be able to contribute to the global community at a time in crisis. So for us, I very much am appreciative for the leadership of the University of Tokyo, and for each and every one of the institutions that participated in this precedent-setting research. I'm not going to go on and on because I think that today, what I really want to do is listen. I want to listen to not just what you found, but to the process that we went through. And I'm really here to figure out how best we can use this pilot to see how we can improve our work, not only in the area of health, but in all of the areas that relate to COVID-19, and then beyond, in terms of all of the areas that our office works on, to see how we can create these types of university and academic partnerships that allow us to engage the students that are enthusiastic about helping move us toward a more human rights enhancing world. But also it helps us understand the value of this concept within the Sustainable Development Goals of partnership. So I want to thank you, and I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to come back at the end, hopefully, with a better sense of where we can go from here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howland. I just want to echo a welcome to the participants, and we are very happy to partner with UN-OHCHR, and we just wanted to highlight, I think, to save some time, that the initial stage was for us to collect cases from Asia that looked like best practices of human rights in time of COVID-19, but COVID-19 itself and the restrictions related to that. And in that process, we had in the initial stage about 70 cases from best practices from Asia. And then what triggered this seminar was that we were so impressed about all the innovative approaches and locally adapted approaches that were taken by so many different actors in Asia. And we just wanted to have an opportunity to share the experiences and to share lessons with you and with the participants. So without further ado, if I could then invite two OHCHR colleagues, colleagues, officers, who are key to this project on the operational level. So I should then invite Mr. George Hodge first. He's a technology advisor at UN-OHCHR, and he develops and absorbs new technology, data sources, data mining methods, and methodologies into OHCHR's work. So if you are around, Mr. Hodge. Yes.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. I've been asked to speak a little bit about the methodology and also to present to you the tool that was used to collect this information. I think the approach we used is known as crowdsourcing. This is quite common through the use of the social internet. It has been for a long time, but for an institution like OHCHR that deals with quite sensitive information, it has been quite careful in the past in terms of the use of such an approach. So what we did was we set up a basic web entry form. I'm going to start sharing my screen if I can now. Yeah, here we go. So you should see this coming through soon.
Yeah, we can see.
Excellent, thank you. So it was a simple web form. If you're familiar with Google Forms, very similar. It enabled the different participants to enter case data into a central database, following which the different contributors had access to the database itself through a simple web interface. If you're interested, the tool we used was called Airtable. And as you can see, some of the case data is presented on the screen here. The users could enter the system and edit it, and add additional information that they'd found as they explored the case further. This also enabled a degree of quality assurance by different members of the team to go in and review the information to check the classification of different cases. And so this enabled, this type of technology enabled collaboration across the network of contributors, and helped to produce the useful data that we're going to be hearing more about, and the insights we're going to be hearing more about over the course of the webinar. Just to give you a quick overview of the types of cases that were discovered, and I should add that it was possible to tag a case to multiple different types of rights. So if you look at the count on the left-hand side and think, hang on, that's an awful lot of cases, it's because perhaps on several occasions a case is relevant to different types of rights. But you can see here the right to health was understandably one of the most common cases found, followed closely by the right to food, and then the right to education. So some interesting themes coming out there in the data. And then there's a sort of second tier that you can see linked to the right to work, access to information, and also social protection. And then you can see a sort of body of other rights that have roughly the same or similar number of cases attributed to that particular type of right. So yeah, there's some really interesting themes emerging from the data when you get this bird's eye view of it. And of course, these will be explored further. And I'll pass the floor now to my colleague Chitra, perhaps, who may wish to talk through some of the other aspects of the collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Now, while you are preparing, if I can introduce Chitra. So next we would like to invite Ms. Dr. Chitra Massey. She's the team leader for outreach, strengthening SDGs and ESCR into COVID-19 responses at the branch at UN-OHCHR, who led this crowdsourcing project at the branch. And she was also regional representative of the High Commissioner to the Pacific, also senior human rights advisor in Tanzania, and more importantly for me, at least, she was in UN-OHCHR Nepal office. So Chitra, if you can.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and good evening and good afternoon, depending on which location you're in. I'm going to take a few minutes to just speak a little bit about how we set about this pilot project. It started with the fact that OHCHR, which relies very much on the information being completely unchallengeable when we report it, sort of all of a sudden finding ourselves in a situation where we had no access to people on the ground. And this was a complete shift for us because we rely on going straight to the horse's mouth, asking people what is happening, verifying and cross-verifying information. And this was a very interesting time for us because all of a sudden we were looking to see that just as much as we were talking about innovation and asking people to be creative, we were also forced to look and see how we could be creative and adapt to the situation. And that's when Todd came up with the idea that we should experiment with crowdsourcing. This was very unusual for the office. And a number of colleagues raised the issues of quality control and credibility at that point in time. So in the context of this, we also realized that, for example, we chose Kerala, which was a state, but which has almost had the population of a small European state. It's a state that was doing well, and we decided to try that as a first part of the pilot. So we had a state within a country, which was our area of focus. We also had one entire country as an area of focus. And then with the University of Tokyo, we had 23 countries that were covered with the help of the department, the departmental hub. So it was an interesting pilot because on one hand, we had a very small nuclear one atom we were looking at, then we were looking at the entire country, and then at multiple countries during the same pilot. So we started this off in June, and it was a very interesting exercise also for us because we had to be able to allow people to enter their own testimonies and amplify the voices from the ground. At the same time, it was important that if we were going to report as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on a perceived or an identified practice as a best practice or a good or a budding best practice, with the potential to build back better, we had to be very sure that the information had been verified. So this was a very interesting challenge given the times of COVID and complete lockdowns. So we had our initial startup, and this is about also finding the right people in the right circumstances. And we've been very lucky, I have to say, that we were able to find amazing volunteers, your students, volunteers on the India project, people working with us as researchers from the Raoul Wallenberg Institute too. So there was a group of people that we were able to put, if I can say so, the right people at the right time in the right place. Was it a fortunate occurrence? No. In certain cases, there are volunteers who were let go or who felt that it was too much and sometimes left, and some of them got more enthusiastic and came back, and we had to invest time. This was a time-consuming process in the sense that we first prepared a package of tools. The Airtable was prepared and was ready to be launched. Then we had to make sure that the volunteers that were going to work with the local coordinators on the ground were aware of the rights. So we had sessions with them on what the rights were. There was in the tool package that was prepared for the volunteers to help us in spreading the word. We also had a list of indicators which had been are in use currently still with the entire UN system, human rights indicators. And for the purposes of this project, we went bottom up, which means that where the indicator would normally look at what was the policy level regulation or directive, we looked down to see what was the experience of the ground and tracking it back to say, was it actually in line, was the policy that had been running this project and the experience of the people, was there a match? Was this policy being effectively implemented? So there was this understanding that was also coming to us. We were able to identify what were gaps. So for this, the volunteers had to have a very good, sound understanding of what was the right and how were the indicators going to be used while engaging with people on the ground when they had the opportunity to talk to them. And so here is the other point. Here we were saying that we were unable to access people. So what does it mean when our volunteers were on the ground? We first started this project in June with some of the state officials, and we discovered that we had a big challenge with language and the ability to engage sometimes with people who could speak English but did not necessarily understand the nuances of the rights or some of the technical language, however much we tried to make it easier for people. So we started looking for local volunteers who could help us with that. And we found a group of 10 volunteers who worked with us in Kerala, who then also helped us to verify stories, because if they heard of a story, they were able to call up either a journalist or to actually, if they were close by or within the locality, they were actually able to go and visit these people, see for themselves, cross-verify information. This was a very important aspect of the project as well. So I want to also just go back to that there were people who were entering the data directly into the crowdsourcing Airtable. There were civil society members who would reach out to the coordinating team and ask for technical assistance if required. And then the volunteers, with the help of the coordinator, would assist them. So we had a number of different approaches that we were forced to take that we had not originally planned. But this allowed us to verify and cross-verify information. And here I just want to shift a little bit to the University of Tokyo, because one of the very important, significant learnings here was that there was quality control provided by the review that was taken by the director of the International Hub. Dr. Hunt undertook the review of all the data entries and made sure that the verification was very solid and robust. And I hope that some of you have had a chance to look at the submission made by the university to the call from the office's call for submission of best practices, which came from the hub as well into the High Commissioner's report. So we had this situation where we had the state, which we then expanded to the entire country. Now, was it an easy process? I have to say that, like I said, that it took quite a bit of time. I just want to share with you that, for example, the Kerala team of 10 collected over a period of 3 months, some under 100 stories, but then spent time verifying and cross-verifying them. And we used them, and we also developed a evaluation framework within this for the team to evaluate what the gap was coming up. So, for example, we found that for migrants, which was one of the biggest beneficiaries in the state of Kerala, access to information was very strong, but access to social security and welfare measures was a big gap. And this came as a result of the analysis of the information and stories that had been collected. In addition, in Kerala, we had the unique privilege of working jointly with the Raoul Wallenberg Institute that had developed a tool for policy analysis. So we combined the policy analysis together with the testimonies that were collected. And this in turn helped us a great deal to understand what were the gaps. How much time do I have?
You're a little bit over time, so if you can conclude.
Okay, so can I just finish by saying that one of the challenges we discovered was that language was a major issue, and that existing relationships helped, but in the long term, we had to really work hard to keep that going. So we invested by having a lot of webinars and keeping in touch with partners, which included that there were explanations being offered, that we were being flexible to ensure that we provided different forms of support, whether it was the use of technical know-how. There was a lot of investment of time in the verification of information used. Sometimes we used more than one method. And then we had this, in the India experience, we created a number of creatives, which were done by volunteers, and we used multiple social media handles to spread the word. And in fact, this was even picked up by a number of celebrities, and they retweeted about the crowdsourcing project in India. And this also helped us a great deal in getting more people interested and wanting to populate the Airtables, which allowed us to collect over 300 stories from India in the same time period. And then, of course, the University of Tokyo worked on 23 countries and collected a large number of stories, out of which we will be hearing a few. So I will end here and wait for some questions, and if there are later, and attempt to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chitra. Now, if I can pass the floor to Timothy Massey, he will be introducing a great example of door-to-door education initiative from Indonesia.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Timothy Massey, and I will be moderating the first segment to highlight some of the best practices from our report. Today, we are joined by Mr. Franciscus Friharna, who is a teacher from the SD Canisius Kenalan Elementary School in Central Java, Indonesia. Mr. Franz, together with his colleagues from SD Canisius Kenalan, initiated the door-to-door education initiative to provide education to students in rural Indonesia who were affected by school closures and who were unable to access stable internet connection to use remote learning systems. Yeah, this is Mr. Franz. Mr. Franz has prepared a short video presentation outlining his door-to-door education initiative. But before I show you the video, I would also like to acknowledge Ms. Agnes Anya, who is an AFP journalist who wrote the online article telling the story of the SD Canisius Kenalan teachers. Her assistance was critical in our research process, helping us getting in touch with Mr. Franz and the rest of the teachers. On behalf of the team, Mr. Franz and Ms. Anya, thank you very much. I also would like to invite everyone to put their questions, if they have any specific questions to Mr. Franz, into the chat box. And in the question and answer session later towards the end, I will provide translation from English into Indonesian for Mr. Franz, and I will translate Mr. Franz's answers from Indonesian to English. So without further ado, please enjoy the video.
SD Canisius Kenalan terletak di pegunungan menoreh lereng timur, tepatnya di Dusun Wonolilo, Desa Kenalan, Kecamatan Borobudur, Kabupaten Magelang. Para murid berasal dari 9 dusun di sekitar sekolah dengan jarak tempuh paling jauh 5 km. Dan 90% dari orang tua para murid adalah para petani. Dalam mensikapi tantangan pelayanan pendidikan, terlebih pada masa pandemi ini, banyak cara telah dilakukan sekolah berdasarkan pemetaan situasi dari berbagai aspek untuk menentukan model atau strategi pengajaran, sehingga bisa berubah menurut situasi atau boleh disebutkan pergerakan pendidikan yang dinamis. Berdasarkan dari data yang diambil dari kondisi real di lapangan, maka model pembelajaran yang cukup efektif saat ini adalah pembelajaran berbasis komunitas belajar. Saat ini telah tercipta 19 titik kumpul atau kami menyebutnya komunitas belajar. Hal ini bisa diperoleh berdasarkan lokasi tempat tinggal anak. Setiap guru melakukan 2 kali kunjung di setiap 19 titik kumpul berdasarkan kelas masing-masing. Dalam sekali pertemuan dalam titik kumpul, guru mengalokasikan waktu 3 jam. Di samping itu, di saat tertentu, sekolah juga mengupayakan cara pembelajaran dengan sistem daring. Pendidikan adalah hak anak untuk maju sesuai dengan pribadinya. Anak seharusnya menjadi manusia seutuhnya, humanis, religius, integral, dan merdeka. Sekolah memiliki pandangan bahwa ukuran keberhasilan pendidikan di dalam hidup sesungguhnya adalah kemampuan manusia dalam menghadapi tantangan hidupnya dengan arif dan bijaksana. Kondisi pedesaan atau kontekstual di SD Canisius Kenalan adalah pegunungan, menyimpan banyak kearifan lokal sebagai kesatuan nilai hidup, walaupun di sisi lain memiliki banyak tantangan hidup yang sangat sulit atau keterbatasan sarana prasarana penunjang kehidupan. Kondisi tersebut sangat berpotensi menjadikan anak sebagai korban situasi. Tidak ada pilihan lain selain memberikan layanan pendidikan berbasis komunitas atau guru terjun ke lapangan. Pandemi adalah kenyataan dari hidup manusia seiring dengan pola hidup tertentu dan akan selalu dihadapi oleh manusia. Maka komunikasi dengan berbagai pihak agar pengambilan keputusan tidak terkesan gerusa-gerusu ketika pembelajaran itu berlangsung. Maka di dalam setiap pembelajaran, di dalam komunitas, sekolah tetap mencoba menerapkan protokol kesehatan dan juga hidup bersih. Protokol kesehatan, hidup bersih, hidup sehat, strategi pemenuhan dan penggunaan sarana hidup, hidup humanis, pengelolaan pekarangan, pengembangan diri anak bersama keluarga, dinamika sosial, dan masih banyak lagi. Nah, justru disitulah pendidikan itu berlangsung. Tidak sedikit tantangan yang guru hadapi ketika sekolah harus tetap menyelenggarakan pendidikan di tengah pandemi ini, terlebih di tengah-tengah ketidakadaan sarana prasarana penunjang belajar, terlebih dalam alat komunikasi dan juga sarana penunjang. Kondisi pegunungan yang ada selalu menjadi teman dan perjuangan para guru selama menghadapi situasi ini, apalagi ketika musim penghujan tiba. Kondisi jalan yang licin tak mungkin ditempuh dengan sepeda motor, maka sudah biasa guru akhirnya harus jalan kaki untuk sampai pada titik kumpul atau sampai ke rumah siswa. Merubah cara dan konten pengajaran sangat tidak mudah untuk dilakukan dengan waktu yang cepat. Guru harus memetakan materi dengan teliti, mengambil pokok materi, dan hingga akhirnya guru mengintegrasikan dengan situasi yang dihadapi para siswa di rumahnya. Tantangan yang tidak kalah menarik adalah cara pandang masyarakat, yaitu tentang keberhasilan pendidikan itu sendiri. Kebenaran pendidikan yang diukur dari angka. Nah, disinilah guru juga memiliki tanggung jawab untuk menyadarkan masyarakat, terlebih masyarakat pedesaan. Tantangan selanjutnya adalah ketersediaan alat protokol kesehatan di pedesaan rata-rata belum bisa mendukung pembelajaran secara optimal. Kondisi pendidikan formal sering terkesan mengesampingkan aspek humanis dan terlebih mengedepankan pemenuhan angka yang tersaji di atas lembar kertas penilaian saja. Sungguh sangat disayangkan jika anak didik mengalami proses pendidikan yang demikian, sehingga anak didik terjebak di dalam paradigma tersebut. SD Kanisius Kenalan selalu berupaya memadukan antara pendidikan dengan akademik dan juga non-akademik secara berimbang dan juga kontekstual. Nah, besar dari harapan tersebut, anak-anak akan mampu berilmu pengetahuan, terampil, sehingga membawa perubahan pada keluarga dan masyarakat. Pada konteks pandemi atau bencana alam, sekolah berusaha menemukan energi positif dari situasi yang ada, walaupun keadaan sekitar dan media komunikasi sosial yang lebih banyak memupuk ketakutan dan energi negatif yang cukup masif. Maka dalam situasi saat ini, kami lebih sepakat mencipta hidup yang sehat, hidup yang seimbang antara manusia dengan alam, hingga suatu saat nanti akan tercipta bumi yang lestari. Dalam menyelenggarakan pendidikan tatap muka, SD Kanisius Kenalan tidak bermaksud untuk menentang penyelenggara negara dalam menghadapi pandemi ini. Justru di situasi seperti ini menjadi ruang guru untuk mengeksplorasi, menemukan, kemudian mengembangkan praktik pembelajaran secara kreatif, kontekstual, dan integratif dengan banyak cara. Dan tentunya tetap memperhatikan aspek kearifan lokal, aspek kemajuan teknologi, tanpa mengesampingkan prosedur penanganan pandemi. Membiasakan murid dalam semua ruang belajar secara konkret diharapkan mampu mewujudkan jiwa-jiwa merdeka dan akan terus kreatif, merdeka, humanis, integral, dan juga religius, hingga kelak para murid, anak-anak akan siap menghadapi tantangan hidupnya. Dalam hal ini, guru tidak hanya sebagai penyampai ilmu pengetahuan, namun juga sebagai teman anak, teman murid dalam mengarungi hidup di dalam keadaan apapun. Pandemi Covid-19 hanya satu dari sekian banyak persoalan hidup yang harus mampu dihadapi oleh siapapun, terlebih oleh generasi penerus. Maka, bagi SD Kanisius Kenalan, melatih murid untuk mampu keluar dari situasi yang menghimpit di dalam keadaan apapun merupakan hal yang sangat penting bagi hidupnya. Pendidikan adalah ruang efektif untuk membawa perubahan. Kondisi lingkungan yang terjadi bukan menjadi alasan untuk tidak terwujudnya hak anak atas pendidikan. Namun justru pendidikan harus bisa mengubah perilaku manusia yang kurang baik menjadi lebih baik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Franz, for the presentation. Again, I would like to invite everyone to put their questions in the chat, and I will translate them later in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim and Mr. Francis. We will have Q&A later. Okay, so if I could then invite Raymond. Mr. Raymond Andaya has been the leader of this operation. So if you can take the floor to talk about coordination and emergency response from a human rights perspective with Mr. Guillermo Bill Lutz, please.
Thank you very much, Professor. So we have Mr. Guillermo Bill Luz here with us, who is Chief Resilience Officer and Advisor of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, or PDRF, which is actually a professional private sector organization for disaster risk reduction management in the Philippines. He has joined us today to talk about Project Ugnayan as part of the PDRF's umbrella of responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. So Project Ugnayan and the PDRF's response to COVID-19 is basically a story of multi-actor, multi-sector coordination and adaptation, with the ultimate aim of helping alleviate the impact of the pandemic on some of the more vulnerable segments of society, as well as their basic human rights concerns, such as food and job security. So with that, if I'd like to invite Mr. Luz. Sir, maraming salamat po for joining us today.
Maraming salamat, Raymond. If I may share my screen.
Yes, sir, you should be able to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Raymond, and thank you, Professor. University of Tokyo and the UN. Let me just get my. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
No, not yet. It's not loading. 1 minute. Let me. Sorry, it's not. Doesn't seem to be loading. Let me start anyway. Talk a little bit about. Let me try again. So my name is Bill Luz, and I am with the I'm with the PDRF. Let me just describe a little bit what we're doing. I'm not sure you can see my screen, but anyway, I'm joined here by my executive director, our executive director at PDRF, Veron Gabaldon. And just a quick introduction, PDRF is a private sector foundation in the Philippines, formed in 2009, 2010. And we dedicate ourselves to disaster resilience, prevention, and preparedness and mitigation. And so after we work all over the country through several types of disasters, primarily typhoons, earthquakes, volcano eruptions, and now pandemics. And last year, when the COVID response, when the WHO declared COVID as a global pandemic, the Philippines went into a lockdown, and we launched a project called Project Ugnayan. And it's a collaborative effort of the private sector, the Catholic Church, managed by PDRF. And our objective was to provide food support for the poorest families within the Metro Manila or Greater Metro Manila area, which is Metro Manila plus the surrounding provinces. And just by way of background, the Philippines entered a enhanced community quarantine or economic lockdown on March 16th, 2020, and all of Manila and the surrounding provinces were on strict economic lockdown, no transport, and very limited work opportunities. So our immediate concern was of hunger among the lowest socioeconomic classes in this area. So our goal was to provide food support, and we wanted to provide food support for 1 to 1.5 million families within this area of Metro Manila and 4 provinces surrounding Metro Manila. And we had to ask ourselves, how are we going to do this in an efficient, scalable manner in a short a period of time as possible, preferably about 4 to 6 weeks. So we decided that we would distribute it in the form of supermarket or grocery gift certificates to families, and it was about 1,000 pesos per family that we wanted to give as emergency support. And in areas where there were no supermarkets, because there are areas where it's outside walking distance, we would get partners to deliver food packs to these families. So we teamed up with several groups. The first was the Catholic Church, known as Caritas. That was our biggest partner in the network. Then we also teamed up with ABS-CBN, which is a television station based in Manila. We also work with the Asian Development Bank, which is headquartered in Manila. And then we worked with Jollibee, which is the largest fast food operator in the Philippines. So those were our distribution channels. And the reason we picked those groups is that it had a branch network that could reach down to the lowest community levels in the city. So in the case of the church is divided into dioceses. So in Metro Manila, there are 10 of them, so 10 districts. And those 10 dioceses had about 900 to 1,000 parishes under them, of which 700 of them were within reach of a poor community. And so those 700 parishes had parish priests. So they were in effect our sort of a branch manager, if you want to call it that, if this were a business. And so we felt we could distribute quickly using that network. In the case of the media, they work directly to the mayor, and then the mayors work with barangay captains, which are the smallest political unit within a city. A barangay is loosely defined as a village. And then in the case of Jollibee, they work through the NGO community. And then from NGO community in each city, they went, those NGOs reached out into smaller community groups based again at the barangay level. So in all cases, we had about 3 layers from headquarters to the lowest level. In 3 steps, we could get down to the barangay level. And then in the case of the Asian Development Bank, they decided to work in areas where we had no reach. So these were typically settlement areas with no supermarkets. So there was going to be no overlap with what the first 3 groups, the church, Caritas, the church, ABS-CBN, and Jollibee was reaching. We thought of different technologies on how to distribute. We didn't want to distribute physical food because it was too difficult to do 1.5 million food packs. So we decided we needed to distribute it in some other way, and we looked at different. We en- we thought through different technologies from electronic cards, smartphones, and even cash. And we eventually settled on gift certificates, so paper-based gift certificates that belong to the grocery stores that were distributed all over the metropolitan area. So when we settled on gift certificates, the reasons were the following: they're light and easy to carry, so we didn't have to do any food packing. There was no perishability. It was more secure than carrying cash, so it was a safer option. It did not require any technology on the ground. The problem with using electronic cards or smartphones is that you need uh, technology, the infrastructure, you need readers on the ground, which the poor communities do not have. And then by going with the church as our main partner, we picked them for 3 main reasons. One is they had the organizational size and the reach to do the job. Second, they had the experience, but most important, they had a level of trust in the community, so that if they approached people or people could approach them for help, we knew that they could be counted on. So this is the biggest factor behind this. Uh, our role in PDRF is that we were sort of a secretariat, the lead implementer, and the project manager for the entire project. We manage all the project's finances. We purchased and deployed the gift certificates through the church, and then we used our own in-house technology to map and create a mapping database. And then we coordinated with Caritas and all the partners to monitor where things were distributed. So I guess the innovations that we brought in after thinking through everything is that one is we used gift checks, so paper rather than food packs. We actually went on a door-to-door distribution, so we did not have any lineups or queues, so that we would not put anyone at a health risk. It was easier to actually go door to door, and it was actually safer. Uh, though we used the Catholic Church, we did not have. It was non-denominational in practice, so we did not use a church as a distribution point, and the priests went door to door. Any religion or an atheist, for that matter, could receive our assistance. We worked at the barangay level, which is the village level in the Philippines, and we used our own mapping tools to monitor everything. We worked closely with grocery stores to find out all their locations, so they could be walking distance to the households we were distributing to. We communicated with all store managers, so the priests did that, to make sure that the store managers would not be surprised to see people coming in with gift certificates to buy groceries. And then we coordinated with the grocery store headquarters to make sure that there was no out of stock situation in any of the stores, because people would be coming into the stores to buy food. We wanted to make sure that there were no stockouts. So those are the kind of the innovations we put in. Eventually, we were able to reach 2.8 million families through our partnerships, and that was done essentially in about 6 weeks with through the church, ABS-CBN, Jollibee, and ADB. So that's 14.2 million people that was reached. So it's a pretty big number, much higher than our original targets. And we used our mapping system just to make sure everything was within reach, walking distance of the population. We met challenges along the way, so we noted them down, and we know how we can make improvements in the future. One of our challenges, believe it or not, was just how to get enough gift certificates to distribute. So because we came in and bought so many gift certificates, we actually had a situation where we were running out of gift certificates. So companies had to print and validate certificates as quickly, and we bought them up as quickly as they could do that. Number two is that communities had never used gift certificates, so we actually had to teach people how to use gift certificates and what stores to go to. And then many of the people we work with don't really have proper identification because we don't have a national ID system in the Philippines. So the door to door, one of the reasons we went door to door with priests is that priests could actually make a listing and check the identification. If there was no identification, they would create lists and get phone numbers, cell phone numbers for each person, and then at least one phone number per household for monitoring purposes. And of course, the challenge was the coverage. The coverage is the biggest we've ever done in such a short span of time. Our role in the private sector, I guess, is to complement and fill the gap between public sector efforts and provide some immediate and tangible support. Our other role is, of course, we're very good in collaborative private sector partnership approach. We work with a lot of companies, almost about 280 different companies put funds into the project, and we had a lot of partners in the distribution. We work with some development partners as well, so that's the kind of role that we play. Our ultimate value is that we try to bring some efficiency into the system. We had scale, we had large targets. We tried to move as quickly as possible because we were addressing hunger, and with people not able to work, we thought we needed to move very, very quickly. So I think that's kind of why we decided to step in and put a very large corporate effort to do this. We've documented all this in a website known as projectugnayan.org, and even internally in the company that I work for, Ayala Corporation, this has been written up as a series of articles. We prepared a series of articles on what company employees and the company itself had done to help, and this is documented in what we call the Ayala Chronicles. So that, in a nutshell, is what we did with Project Ugnayan. And I just want to say that it's just one of many projects we did during the COVID response. Actually, our larger part of the project is on the health side of things, where we provided coordinated efforts for expanding testing capacity, procuring PPEs, and now working on the vaccine deployment program with the government. But this was the very first project we embarked on during the COVID response because we thought that was the first need of the day to address hunger. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Bill. And I see Miss Veronica Gabaldon is also here with us, so hopefully she can also say, just in case there are some very specific questions about your work. So yeah, if you do have questions about the PDRF's work and Project Ugnayan, please do use the chat function of the meeting. Professor Kiharahan, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond and Mr. Bill. Luz. Now, if I could invite the Thai team, so moderated by Chihiro from our hub and Mr. Egyotin Pila, and I'm really bad at Thai names, I'm very sorry. Chayaporn Arunetong, would that be right? Yeah,
yes.
So over to you.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Chihiro Toya. I'm a member of the International Law Hub. So I'd like to introduce two presenters for this section. So first of all, Ek Yotimpira, a developer of Mask Map Thailand. So I'm sharing the screen of yes, and this is an online map with timely and up-to-date information on the location of sellers, prices, and stocks of face masks in all regions of Thailand. And this initiative helped enhance citizens' access to relevant information by providing an innovative and widely available tool for addressing the most important immediate concerns related to the pandemic. And the second speaker is Chanyapon Arunatonton, a Bangkok resident and user of the Mask Map, who will share her personal experience of using the website and how it helped her navigate through challenges of the pandemic. So yeah, I will pass it to Ek Yotin to give his presentation.
Okay, hi everyone. It's the first I am apology for the if you can hear ambient sound because I am in the car. So the first thing that I created to creating my website because in the first stage of the pandemic in Thailand, we cannot find the face mask or the alcohol gel because we have a lot of the demand of the face mask. And then I saw the website in the Taiwan that that they can do something like that. And I think, hey, it's not hard to create it, and I can do with myself. So I start to create this website with 3 days and provide this website in the Facebook and tell my friend to share this website. So we have a lot of sharing these websites in the social media, and then we have a lot of a lot of information in the information of the shop, the location, and the stock of face mask that you see in the screen. We have the marker of in the map, and in the marker we have a color on and the number of price. Yeah, something like can you click? Yeah, we have something like we have 300 stock and price is 20. 20 baht per each. But something we have the face mask or the fabric mask, and we have a shop information like address or phone number. If user cannot find the shop in the closest location or closest home, they can use this website to find out the shop, and you can click the button in the find near me in the button the bottom of the website. Find near me. Yeah, that so easy to find the shop. Yes, it's closest and near. I think it's so very helpful if we cannot find the map at the first mass.
Thank you. Now I will pass it over to Chanyapon.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. So my name is Sho. I am about to share my experience during pandemic and how I benefited from the MassMap Thai website. Last year in March, nobody in Thailand foreseen that COVID-19 would be very detrimental to our health. However, as many scientists warned that coronavirus would have a negative impact on our lung and respiratory system, the new normal lifestyle was introduced here. We have to wash our hands regularly, use separate spoon when eating food, set a social distancing, and most importantly, we have to wear face masks when going outside. This new normal life is invented to protect our health and other people's health. At that time, I was a senior year student at Chulalongkorn. Before the online class was announced, I had to go to the university 3 days a week, and it was not good for me since I had to commute to school by the train, sit in the room with almost 30 people and discuss about the subject. So my lifestyle was prone to get infected. At that point, I needed to find a face mask to prevent me from infection, but I was quite late on acquisition. Some people just hoarded the face masks because they were fear that the pandemic will last longer, which in fact, I think they are right. This incident resulted in face mask shortage. I could not find the face masks around my neighborhood. Fortunately, I came across the MassMap Thai website, so I checked it. The website helped people who searching for the mask in order to get the location accurately. Since last year, there were shortage of surgical masks, and masks made from cloth were not prevalent. This MassMap website, which shown real-time mask stocks, play an important role in making platform for mask sellers all across the country to show if they have commodities or people in general who have crews where they sell masks to report it on the internet. Thankfully, I got a face mask from the dark store nearby Isla Pub Station, which is about 5 kilometers from my house. In my opinion, the MassMap Thai website was very helpful in the situation where masks were hard to acquire, and going outside to find masks without accurate direction is quite dangerous. This real-time database system helped reduce the risk of being exposed during COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if you have any question about the map, yeah, please put that in the chat. And yeah, now I will pass it back to Professor Kihara-han. Thank you.
Thank you, Chihiro-san and the Thai team, I call. Now, maybe if I can invite the International Law Hubs team to introduce a few more examples that we cannot, unfortunately, feature in this seminar, but still great examples. So over to you, maybe Satoko-san. So Satoko Haru-san will introduce Japan's example.
Yes, hello, my name is Satoko and I am part of the researching team at the University of Tokyo. So in a very short space of time, I will summarize the case that I was looking at, which is called the Sophia Refugee Support Group, which is a student-led group from Sophia University in Tokyo that combines both research and support activities in creating a community for refugees and asylum seekers in Tokyo. And they have for quite a while predominantly protected the right of social service. So pre-pandemic, the group had held face-to-face meetings with refugee cafes where participants were provided with food and also language education. And they also had regular visits to detention centers in Tokyo, providing translation services and also medical help. However, many of these activities, in particular the face-to-face activities such as the refugee cafes, were put on hold as a result of the pandemic. So since the spread of COVID-19, the group had to significantly modify and also reduce their activities. So they decided to focus on two main points. The first being the detention centers, and the second being those on provisional release. So for the detention centers, despite the high risk of infection and closed spaces, masks were not distributed at these centers originally. So through crowdsourcing on social media, the group held regular mask distributions, and this is still continuing right now. And they're still getting a lot of masks through the crowdsourcing. And the second was supporting those who are on provisional release, because asylum seekers in Tokyo and in Japan can be on provisional release, which means they're not in the centers, but they're still not medically insured and they're not eligible to work. So they supported those on provisional release by providing food and essential healthcare packages. So the group has a contact list of regular participants, and so they would send a general call, and whoever replies could get a package delivered. And this was done in partnership with a food bank called Second Harvest, and it gradually expanded through word and mouth. So those who are not direct participants could also hear about it through word and mouth. And healthcare packages also included women's sanitary products, which are also obviously essential. And because of the remote nature, they were also able to continue translation services, which was essential as many of the processes were halted. So while many NGOs focused on fundraisers, this group fills a gap that neither the NGOs nor the government were able to provide in terms of direct support for marginalized groups such as asylum seekers. The unique feature of the group is its flexibility in adapting to emergency situations, and in particular, the direct and personal approach in maintaining contact with the participants that allowed them to monitor the biggest needs of the asylum seekers. And these activities ensured that despite their situation, the asylum seekers got a right to standard of living, which is why it was also included amongst the COVID best practices for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Satoko-san, for introducing the example from Japan. Now, if I could invite Lauren to introduce Ms. Lauren Power, also assisting in this process at the International Law Hub, who will be talking about Singapore's example.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Lauren Power, and I will be sharing some high-level insights about an organization called the COVID-19 Migrant Support Coalition, or CMSC, in Singapore. What originally began as an informal group of 30 to 50 migrant allies and volunteers before COVID-19 organically coalesced into the CMSC organization under the leadership of 3 co-founders, one of whom I had the opportunity to speak with at length for this project. There are 2 aspects of best practice I want to highlight about CMSC. First is needs-based support and multi-stakeholder engagement. After the onset of COVID-19 in Singapore, when the government started lockdowns, or circuit breakers as they are known there, in April of 2020, CMSC rapidly scaled up to a volunteer force of approximately 700 to meet the growing needs of the migrant workers. Over 20% of Singapore's population of 5.7 million are foreign workers, most of whom hold an FDW or CMP work permit and are employed in construction, shipping, manufacturing, or domestic work sectors. The majority live in dormitories on the outskirts of the island. Singapore's lockdowns confined migrant workers to these dormitories, restricting them to living conditions that made social distancing impossible. Migrant workers have accounted for over 90% of Singapore's COVID-19 cases. while the Singapore government swiftly pivoted to providing for the 43 large purpose-built migrant dormitories, which can house up to 10,000 workers each, CMSC focused on supporting those living in Singapore's 1,200 medium-sized dormitories, which can house 500 to 1,000 migrant workers each. The scale of the needs was huge. The co-founders designed a three-pillar approach to meet those needs. First, ground support to deliver meals and daily necessities such as toiletries and phone cards directly to dormitories. Second, mental health and community support online, including translations of COVID-19 information, both locally and about the origin countries of the migrant workers, resources about healthy habits and stress management, and two communication applications, We Pals and We Talk, to connect the confined migrant workers with Singaporean volunteers outside. Third, legal and casework for migrant workers with a particular focus on the evolving issues during the pandemic. Financial support for these efforts was sourced from businesses, government, and private donors. In all its work, CMSC has skillfully maintained its multi-stakeholder engagement, mindful of the interdependencies of all parties involved. While providing goods and services to migrant workers, it is also engaged in knowledge sharing and capacity building with the dorm operators and the migrant employers to enable better, more targeted support on their end. CMSC also has provided on-the-ground feedback to government and policymakers about the migrant worker experience during COVID-19. Finally, the lasting connections between Singaporean volunteers and migrant workers inspired a series of seminars delivered to local community centers across Singapore to highlight the dignity of the migrant workers and sustain the awareness of the Singaporean public on the issues they face. It is the hope of the CMSC, co-founders to continue to support migrant workers in the post-COVID environment, adapting its approach to support in response to changing needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. That is also an impressive example. So maybe if I can then invite Mr. Raymond Andaya, who's been leading this operation on University of Tokyo's team. So Raymond will give a few more examples and the summary. Raymond?
Yes, so please excuse me for I have to share my screen just to give a few talking points as a summary of our contribution to the crowdsourcing database project. Earlier, George talked about the methodology for the crowdsourcing database, and then Chitra also talked about some of the challenges that we had as part of this really big research team. But at the Hub, we felt that a more qualitative in-depth approach highlighting particular cases would be more useful, beneficial for us to be able to contribute to the crowdsourcing database project. So just a few quick points to summarize our experience in researching for this crowdsourcing database project. We found some context-specific existing vulnerabilities were magnified in many of the cases. And we also found that some segments of society experienced even more economic and social marginalization. And one example of this is the issue of food insecurity. An example of a good practice here is the Rice ATM project in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, which was initiated by an entrepreneur to help address this problem of food security. And then there is also this example that is trying to address the issue of job security in the Philippines, in Cotabato in the Philippines, by the Mindanao Green Workers Association, providing opportunities to bamboo weavers to create bamboo face shields. There is also an example trying to address the increasingly important issue of mental health through the contributions of the Indonesian Psychological Association, providing professional psychological and mental health assistance through the National Helpline. Another point that we took note of in this research project is there have been a combination of innovative methods and existing practices adapted to a pandemic environment. And a lot of these examples are actually local initiatives. An example of this is a digital tea bidding platform in Sri Lanka, which actually helped the tea industry to continue operating amidst the restrictions of the pandemic, particularly helpful for the women workers of these tea plantations. Another example is a contribution from an NGO in Delhi, India, called Wishes and Blessings. Since the onset of the pandemic, they have served meals to more than 15,000 people. So definitely more than that, in fact, at this point, in 6 states in India through partnerships with multiple NGOs. The third point is that we noticed multi-actor cooperation and public-private synergy. So there are new actors and new partnerships, contributions from the business community, student organizations, and even individuals. So again, we heard stories of this example from the PDRF earlier and from the teachers in Indonesia, and also the contributions from the Indonesian Psychological Association would be a good example of this public-private synergy that we're talking about. And then finally, we noticed that a lot of these practices, responses, can actually be replicated amidst other large-scale challenges and emergencies, perhaps not just the COVID-19 pandemic. We noticed that even responses initiated by individuals can actually have a very significant effect. And an example of this is what we heard from the mask map example earlier from Thailand. And another example would be from Indonesian journalists who launched a campaign through social media to collect secondhand mobile phones that can be donated to students that need devices to participate in online learning. So these are some of the more remarkable examples that we highlighted in our contributions to the Crowdsourcing Database project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond. We see that there are a lot of interesting stories and we are a little bit behind time. So we would like to start the Q&A without any further ado, but so we may go over 5 minutes or so if that is okay with the participants and the speakers and participants. So maybe first question may be first thing that I think I should clarify is a question that says clarify the characteristic of human rights best practices and the difference. It just got deleted in my difference between that and the human and development aid. So I think that's the question came because I had to cut the first opening speech. So the 3 things that we were very careful of in collecting these examples was 1, that the practice or service or whatever this practice is, and normally it's a service of some kind, it's targeting at a very marginalized community or people. So protecting the people's human rights, protecting people's human rights of those people who are vulnerable newly because of COVID or restrictions, or vulnerability is being exacerbated by COVID or restrictions. The second thing that we were careful of in selecting those best examples, practices, is that those services address human rights that are forgotten or often left behind in COVID responses. And third part that we were very careful of was to find examples that were particularly innovative, locally oriented, or otherwise suggesting new approaches or new partnerships to fill the gap of human rights protection. So that's the things that we looked for in selecting those examples. Now maybe then if I could take this question that was addressed to OHCHR. How does the OHCHR see a new partnership in filling the gap? And what is the plan for new partnership in the near future? Would Chitra like to answer it, or Todd?
Do you want to go or should I?
Go ahead, Todd.
No, if I could also, Professor, I'd just like to go a bit further on the relationship to human rights and the projects, because I can see the point of the individual who had the question. And it relates again to partnerships and what we're talking about in terms of, sort of the direction of human rights. I think what we've seen from this is how realities are much more complex than the concepts we learn, at the beginning of university or in school. Is that what was interesting, for example, from the first example, was that the teacher Franz and Timothy were very clear that we were talking about the right to education. And they saw that there were a number of opportunities relative to right to education that went beyond the state. And I think that this is interesting because today in the contemporary human rights, we see that corporations have human rights obligations. We see that powerful entities have human rights obligations relative to others. And so the framing of the response was important because it started with the recognition that each individual has rights. And that then entities that were in a better position actually responded. Now you could say, well, that sounds like a humanitarian response. But I think if you really listened or I read the video with teacher Franz, he comes at this from a human rights perspective, that each individual has a right to education. And it's a less statist and less traditional approach, but I think that's where we're going as a world. And it relates to the partnership idea. Today, there are many corporations that have many more resources and much more power than a number of member states of the United Nations. So the idea of human rights is perhaps the most flexible concept that we have in terms of being able to say, wait, there's a power source, they have obligations to others. Here we have violations happening. How do we respond? And so it's where we hope to go with partnership is that through this, we get a better sense of the realities and the interpretation of rights, obligations, duty bearers. And it's absolutely fascinating to see how people interpret the concepts and how they apply them. And that it's not for us to actually say, oh, that's an incorrect conceptual take on human rights. In fact, no, we have to learn from how people are using rights to actually create the type of human rights societies that we actually want, which is the societies where rights are respected and leaving no one behind. So the idea of partnership in the future is very much related to, I think, expanding, because rights relate to individuals. And the more that we actually engage with individuals globally, the more we'll actually create a global understanding and a global movement for that change. So thanks for the question.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I have another question that is for Door-to-Door Indonesia. So if Tim, if you can ask, where did the initiative come from and how much communication did you have with others in planning this service?
Ini pertanyaan untuk Bapak Franz dari SD Kanisius Kenalan. Pertanyaannya adalah, dari mana asal ide untuk melakukan inisiatif ini? Asal idenya dari mana? Dan seberapa banyak komunikasi yang Bapak lakukan dengan pihak-pihak lain seperti pemerintah atau organisasi lainnya? Mohon maaf, Pak. Mikrofonnya boleh dinyalakan dulu.
Selamat sore, teman-teman yang terkasih.
Good evening, everyone.
Perjalanan menghadapi pandemi ini dimulai dari bulan Februari tahun 2020 kemarin.
The journey to addressing this pandemic started in February 2020.
Situasi yang kami hadapi memang pada awal mulanya kami mengikuti apa yang menjadi anjuran dari pemerintah lewat kebijakan untuk pembelajaran secara daring.
In the beginning, we followed the government's instruction to have online and remote learning.
Namun dalam kenyataannya kami menghadapi banyak tantangan untuk tersampaikannya sebuah materi atau pembelajaran itu sendiri.
But in reality, we found it difficult to provide education through such means because of the lack of infrastructure and communication tools.
Dalam perjalanannya, sekolah selalu membuat evaluasi dari perjalanan rentang waktu dari waktu-waktu.
From time to time, the school always assess and reassess their performance in handling the situation.
Untuk menentukan pembelajaran dari rumah ke rumah atau kami menemukan formula pembelajaran di komunitas, ini berlangsung kurang lebih sekitar setengah tahun.
In formulating the learning community-based teaching approach, we had to assess our performance over the course of 6 months.
Pada awalnya, guru juga mengalami takut karena pandemi yang begitu mengkhawatirkan dan tidak tentu kapan selesainya. Sehingga sekolah memberanikan diri untuk dari rumah ke rumah guru mengunjungi murid satu persatu, kemudian dikelompokkan menjadi 19 komunitas.
In the beginning, teachers were already concerned because of the uncertainty of when the pandemic would end. As such, the teachers initiated the program by having one-to-one individual visits. And from then, they reassessed the situation and grouped the students into 19 different meetup points or learning communities.
Untuk selanjutnya, sekolah selalu berusaha untuk mengumpulkan data baik dari orang tua, yang meliputi pergerakan orang tua, pergerakan masyarakat sekitar, dan juga mengikuti data yang di-launching oleh pemerintah terkait dengan jumlah persebaran pandemi. Ini sebagai ukuran kami untuk menentukan bagaimana pendidikan itu berlangsung di daerah kami atau di sekolah.
In the future, the school will keep on reevaluating their approach by looking at the movement patterns of their parents, other people in the village, as well as the number of cases provided by the data from the government in trying to readdress and reevaluate the most appropriate approach in handling this door-to-door initiative. I think that concludes the answer. Terima kasih banyak, Pak Franz. Thank you very much, Mr. Franz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Franz and Tim. Next question, I know that it is time, so if I could take one more question for Mr. Bill Luz, and that is the question about the resilience. So how did resilience work compared to other recovery framework?
Oh, I see. Great question. So we learned our lesson. In the past, we engaged primarily in relief and recovery efforts, and it's long, it's expensive, and recovery period is quite long after a major disaster. So in 2013, after a super typhoon, we actually changed our model and captured more resilience. So we invested more in preparedness and prevention, and we actually changed our name. PDRF used to mean Philippine Disaster Recovery Foundation, and then we changed our name to Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. And we started investing in preparedness, prevention, mitigation. We engaged in a lot of training. We also engaged in area continuity, business continuity, and service continuity. So we train businesses in business continuity programs, but we also work with the government to build service continuity programs. And we find that people can recover much faster from disasters as a result of an investment in resilience. So it was an expensive lesson from the past, but we're glad we made the change, and resilience has really paid off for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bill Luz. Now, I saw a question that is already answered by Egiopin Pila on the map. So and I know that it is quite pressed with time. So if I could maybe ask the closing remarks. I'm very sorry for a lot of questions and answers that was sent beforehand, and some of the members were ready to answer them. But we were too impressed with the stories, and we are quite pressed with time. So thank you so much for all the speakers. And now, if I could invite Todd from OHCHR to have some remarks and sort of summary of this seminar, please.
Thank you, Professor. First, I want to again thank the University of Tokyo for the cooperation and helping us build a new path forward. Second, I want to thank let's say the activists from Indonesia, from Philippines, and from Thailand. No matter what background, all were very concerned about how to realize rights in an unprecedented context. And their efforts showed how important it was to bring people together and to look at how a rights-based approach can be most useful to producing the proper result. And in all cases, and the University of Tokyo found this in their presentation, multiple actor cooperation, private-public partnership in the context of people that could have been left behind and had their rights violated. And that individual initiative helped create changes. So I think that the examples, the stories are super interesting and very instructive for us. I also want to thank the students, Raymond, Timothy, Lauren, Haijun, Sakoto, and Chihiro, for taking the time, for participating in this. And I really think that it gives us a sense of hope in terms of where we might want to go in the future in terms of the involvement of the academy and how this project was structured. Of course, it came up with, I think George at the beginning from our office was a bit kind when he said that taking up new technologies, taking up new methods for the UN is very difficult. It's a large organization and a state-based organization. So uptake of new technology, there's always resistance. New techniques like crowdsourcing with really many problems that could relate to them. And then the idea of partnership, all of them were new. And so we have to really look at the results of this, learn from it, and then we will build on it. And so I do want to thank people for their participation. And I want to thank those individuals involved in the very important stories in terms of the response to COVID. And I want to congratulate them for their work. And I also want to thank again the University of Tokyo for this opportunity. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Todd Howland. If I could then invite Professor Moriyuki Hoshino. She's the chairperson of the graduate program on human security, who's been very kind to tolerate this this bombardment of seminars by us. So please, you have the floor.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Moriyuki Hoshino, Director of the Graduate Program of Human Security at the University of Tokyo, a program called briefly HSP. It is my pleasure to be here taking part of this seminar on the best practices facing various problems under this pandemic situation caused by COVID-19, and I appreciate every participant's reports and reflection So thank you, the speakers. And as you know, probably since its creation in 2004, our human security program is meant to be a program that aims to support students and scholars in both terms of education and research to face various issues concerning the human security. And this time, I believe that the realization of this seminar in collaboration with UN-OHCHR, focusing on the activities of non-governmental actors is really meaningful, all the more as the concept of human security itself implies the importance of non-state actors. And I hope this collaboration will be all the more fruitful from now on. I'd like to express my feeling of gratitude toward all the speakers and the participants and the supporting organizations. And lastly, permit me to add a few words in French, as my main field of research is francophone literature. Donc, je vous souhaite, vous tous, un bon déroulement de vos activités et de vos recherches. Et aussi, je vous souhaite bon courage et bonne chance. Good luck to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hoshino. That's encouraging words for us. So now I would have to close this seminar, but if I can just draw your attention to the next seminar that we have, that is on Magnitsky law comparisons among 3 areas. So I put the link to the chat, and then if I can also, as a last part, put this initiative that included one of the team members, Amishi Agrawal. Maybe if you want to put your camera on. This is a student network that is between Tokyo students and, well, students in Japan and students in India who have partnered to select those NGOs that are especially targeting vulnerable population amidst severe COVID wave. So I put the link to the chat. So if you can have a look, that would be great. Thank you very much from our hub. Now, I also would like to close by thanking of course, our partners, UN-OHCHR, for being very flexible to partner with us and finding a way together to do this project, and also to be very open to new ideas. And one of the new ideas is maybe I can invite Hanjun to just say like 1-2 sentences about our research that is really stemming from OHCHR's initiative, and we are planning as a next step. Hanjun?
Okay. Hello everyone, my name is Hanjun, and I'm also one of the member in this project, and I am recently searching the good practice in Cambodia, and of course there are a lot of very good practices. For example, there are organizations providing food, which is the part that's left by the government, and in this step, I also would like to compare that the government left which part, like specifically which marginal groups or which kind of right that cannot be protected very well by the government. So so maybe to look to get a more microscopic scope to know we can still work on which part of to provide a more comprehensive protection to those left population.
Okay, thank you, Hanjun. So may I close by thanking UN-OHCHR, Mr. Todd Howland and Chitra Masi, who's been the key key to this partnership. George Hodge, of course, for making this wonderful technological tool for to connect the world and to people. Also, I would like to thank all the joint organizers, and then many thanks goes to the student team and those people who are already there, Raymond, Laurent, Timothy, Satoko, and Chihiro, and Hanjun. But also in an earlier stage, we had Paul Namkum, Amishi Agrawal, and Tonfei, who are also here. So thank you very much, and we would like to close here. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.